All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. The mascot of the Baltimore Ravens is a bird. But right now, the focus might come down to another bird as you have to wonder whether or not that this franchise is playing chicken with their franchise quarterback. If you follow the NFL, then you're pretty aware now of the tense contract situation between the Ravens and Pro Bowl quarterback Lamar Jackson. The Ravens slapped a non exclusive franchise tag on Jackson last month after both sides failed to agree on a long term deal. But with the NFL draft 3 weeks away, would the Ravens decide to start over at quarterback by drafting another signal caller? Ravens general manager Eric DeCosta left the door open earlier this week when he was questioned about taking a quarterback. And I only say left the door open because every general manager in the NFL draft has to do his due diligence for every position leading up to the draft. But of course, reporters will sometimes look for an opening when they ask a question. Now, in talking about it, DaCosta was quoted as saying, "It depends on the board. It really does." I mean, I'd have to say yes because we have quarterbacks in our top 31. So, based on that alone, simple math, I would have to say yes. But, however, in this case, let's be realistic. As Baltimore and Jackson, and I've talked about this before, both sides have had more than 2 years now to hammer out this contract extension, and it still has not happened. Jackson, of course, is currently representing himself, and we don't know publicly, at least, whether or not that there is any ill will at this point from these contract negotiations that will hamper the relationship of the Ravens and Jackson going forward. With the non exclusive tag, Jackson is free to negotiate with any team around the league. And if a deal is struck with Jackson and another team, the Ravens would have 5 days to match it or let Lamar leave. And in doing so, they would get back a pair of first round picks. But like I said before, I highly doubt that Lamar Jackson would be willing to play for the 1 year tag at just north of $32 million. The Ravens and Jackson, again, have had more than 2 years to get this done, and it still has not happened. First and foremost, I think egos have gotten in the way of this process. And at that case, you need a mediator. At this point, maybe an agent. I've talked about that before as well, to try to step in and like mediate this thing and get this deal done. But even with Lamar looking around the NFL, why have there not been any takers? And that to me is the biggest mystery because I look at a lot of teams, not a lot, but there are some teams around the NFL right now that need a quarterback. And if you're telling me, you got to pay Lamar Jackson and go out there and give up 2 first round picks, that's an opportunity that you definitely want to jump on because at the end of the day, is Lamar Jackson right now better than any of these quarterbacks in the draft? Absolutely. TFX, what's going on? And you're asking, do you think he just needs an agent? Yeah, I do. And I've talked about this before, and I'll talk about it again right now. It's one of those scenarios where sometimes it's not about the cost. It's more sometimes about the cost as far as how much it's going to cost you if you don't do something, business wise, you know, or and for any scenario, if you have to go to court, you figure you might try to go out there and save a couple of bucks by representing yourself, but paying for that lawyer, you know, is going to, save you a lot of grief and heartache. In this scenario right here, you're acting as your own agent. You're trying to set up these meetings. You're trying to broker things. It's one of those scenarios where you go out there and you pay that agent, and that person represents you. That person just goes out there and gets that deal done. Maybe not with the Ravens or somebody else. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If Lamar Jackson had an agent, this deal is probably done at least a year ago. Maybe not with the Baltimore Ravens, but with somebody else because, you know, Lamar's agent probably would have drawn a hard line in the sand. And I'm just hypothetically speaking, because obviously he doesn't have an agent. But, at the same time, he'd have been working that phone. He'd have been trying to like leverage, other teams are out there to say, hey, you know what? I got this guy available. This is what he can do. He can do X, Y, and Z. The bottom line is Lamar would be happier regardless if he got that payday from Baltimore or somebody else. So I definitely do think that he needs an agent. But again, it's egos. I think Lamar wants to go out there and prove that he does not need an agent, and the Baltimore Ravens are holding a hard line on this. And it's a scenario where both sides need each other. They can go on and have success in a different direction. Obviously, if the Ravens got themselves another quarterback, or if Lamar went to another team, they can have success, yes. But I think it's one of those where both sides need each other at this point. And it's just, it's a business relationship, obviously. And both sides right now, they're just simply at the fork in the road. We just got to wait and see what happens from here. But again, it really surprises me that there aren't that many takers or there aren't any takers for Lamar Jackson. And with that said, will the Ravens and Jackson strike a deal? I am really not optimistic at this point because the Ravens, I really don't feel a budging. They feel that they have given what they believe is a fair market deal. And Lamar Jackson simply believes that he is worth more than that. And again, like I've talked about it before, Lamar's looking at that Deshaun Watson contract that he got from the Cleveland Browns. And that's what this all comes down to. But it's a scenario where these guys, the Ravens and Lamar Jackson, in my opinion, I don't feel that they're even close to a deal at this point. Does he show up to training camp? Maybe. Does he sign the franchise tag? I highly doubt it. So that leads back to the NFL draft later this month. And, there are four quarterbacks that could be selected in the first round. Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are definitely out of the question. I do feel that they're going to be 1 and 2 respectively in this draft. So unless the Ravens are willing to move heaven and earth to get up to that second spot, which I doubt because the Houston Texans are definitely going to take a quarterback, as is the same case for the Carolina Panthers, which is why they made the trade with the Bears. So, you can put it to bed as far as the Ravens being interested in Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Now, with that said, that leaves the likes of Will Levis, that leaves the likes of Anthony Richardson. Would the Ravens want to trade up to get one of those quarterbacks, or would they sit back and wait for a guy maybe like Hendon Hooker? Again, for me, none of these guys that are in the draft right now are better than Lamar Jackson right now. I could foresee a scenario where if the Ravens see one of these guys drop to them when they're picking later in the first round, do they entertain the idea? Absolutely. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities. I'm not going to go out there at this point and say it's a slam dunk, but I definitely think it's a possibility, and it's in the back of the mind of Ravens general manager Eric DeCosta as well as head coach John Harbaugh. Now, TFX, you're asking, do you think he'll actually sit out the whole year? I would not be surprised to see Lamar Jackson do that. I mean, obviously, we all know $32 million is a lot of money to pass up on. But at the end of the day, Lamar is set for what he believes is right and fair for his situation. I don't think he's budging. I don't think he's going to go out there and take the $32 million just for 1 year and risk possibly getting hurt again. Remember, he's gotten hurt the last 2 years and he's missed some time. And I guarantee you in these negotiations that the Baltimore Ravens are using that against them. Any team is going to use it against them. I think arbitration in baseball is, a fine line for it because sometimes you hear about these stories coming out as far as there being bad blood between teams because a team is going to go out there and give every possible reason to not pay a guy, even though they want the guy. Anything to try to bring down the dollar amount. So, with that said, does Lamar possibly, sit out this year to prove a point? I think it's a possibility. It's a scenario where if he does sit out the year, do the Ravens just cut bait and just go in a completely different direction for 2023 and 2024 and going forward? Maybe. I'll tell you like this. It's also a scenario where could we come back and revisit this from another team next year? Maybe, but my whole thing is this. Again, I look at some of these teams around the NFL right now, and you can make the case for several clubs. Hey, you're a quarterback away from getting to the playoffs and being a contender. And in this current National Football League, you are not going to win unless you have a guy at the quarterback position. The days of the game manager are a thing of the past in the NFL. You got to go out there and have yourself a guy. Pro Bowl caliber quarterback, Lamar Jackson, former MVP. It's one of those where the Ravens at the same time, they have not done the greatest job as far as putting talent around Lamar Jackson on the offensive side of the ball as well, especially from the skill position point. Mark Andrews is a tremendous tight end, but Baltimore has struggled to run the football in the last couple of years if it's not Lamar Jackson leading the charge. So with that said, there's it's a very interesting scenario right here with it, which is what's going down in Baltimore. And I think 3 weeks from now, when the draft is all said and done and put in the books, I think we'll have a better perspective as far as where the Ravens view their scenario with Lamar Jackson. If they go out there and take a quarterback early on in this draft, does not necessarily have to be in round number one. But if the Ravens definitely take a quarterback early, you know that number one, they're banking on an insurance policy. Should this thing with Lamar not get done, and also at the same time, they're just looking ahead to the future. Whereas if they do not take a quarterback, they truly believe in Lamar Jackson going forward and they want to make this work. But again, you've had more than 2 years to figure this out for both sides. That's where, the pessimist in me comes out. Has Lamar Jackson played his last game for the Baltimore Ravens? I've talked about this before. It's a possibility, but it's not a guarantee. Again, it would not surprise me if Lamar Jackson does not show up to training camp. It would not surprise me if Lamar Jackson is not under center for the Ravens in week number one. It would not surprise me, excuse me, if Lamar Jackson sat out the entire year to prove his point, to try to go out there and get his paper. To me, I think I'm not going to say it's the ultimate game of chicken, but it is a game of chicken because in the negotiation process, obviously, you always want to see who blinks first. The Ravens are steadfast in what they feel Lamar Jackson is worth. Lamar Jackson is steadfast in how much he feels that he is worth. Will there be a resolution between both sides? I'm not sure. Will Lamar get that payday from somebody else? I'm not sure either. But nonetheless, this is a sticky situation to say the least. And again, we are going to find out sooner rather than later if the Ravens truly believe in Lamar Jackson. If they go out there and draft a quarterback early, it opens up a whole can of worms. And people are going to be talking about this from now, probably until training camp and then on. So let's just stay tuned and see what happens with this very dicey situation that's going on between Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 pounds of sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. TFX, as always, is good to hear from you. Thank you for chiming in, and I always appreciate your support. Hope you have a good weekend, and I'm sure you probably got an eye on the stretch run of the NBA season as well as the start of the MLB season. And I'll definitely be talking about both of those in the very near future, especially from the NBA's aspect with the playoffs literally right around the corner. So, folks, enjoy your weekend. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. And as always, this is William Martin signing off and thanking you once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.